Well, just a couple of other stories that are coming out this morning. So we can see here that there's going to be a urgent meeting. Energy ministers from the group of 20 major economies will convene an extraordinary meeting by video conference that's scheduled to take place on Friday to ensure energy market stability. This is according to an internal document that has been signed by Reuters. The call was organized by G20 host Saudi Arabia, which is locked in an oil price war with Russia. So there should be something coming out of that. The call will follow another virtual meeting on Thursday of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies, including Russia, to discuss possible production cuts. So that's just a heads up, and some of the latest coming through from coronavirus on a day like this, where many people are looking on and worrying about the situation. And one of the other, of course, big stories that we're looking at this morning is that of the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And he, of course, as we heard, was admitted into intensive care overnight, and leaders from across the world have sent messages of support for the British Prime Minister, who is in intensive care. And the 55-year-old has been given oxygen, they say, but is not yet on a ventilator. That's the report coming through, with authorities saying he has a persistent high temperature. So there have been some messages coming from the US, Donald Trump, of course, French President Emmanuel Macron, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, among many others, as the UK has over 52,000 COVID-19 cases and over 5,000 deaths, as we report here this morning. So those are some of the stories coming through on the news wires from international stories. And I also see that the Global Citizen is launching something. I did see it a bit earlier with a whole bunch of artists that I think are going to be performing, and they're trying to raise funds for the World Health Organization. So I'll find more about that story, and we'll be able to find out how we can access it and what we can do, I suppose, to help on our side, whatever it may be. Here's another story, and you know that a lot of our South Africans are being repatriated from around the world, and this is quite a worrisome time for many people. So 26-year-old is on the growing list of South Africans, 120 South Africans stranded in Vietnam as a result of COVID-19. It's a teacher that we're talking about here from Port Elizabeth, remains under lockdown in a country with more than 240 confirmed cases of coronavirus. According to Home Affairs, Home Away, this is an organization formed by a group of volunteers. More than 2,500 South Africans remain stranded in 130 countries across the world, and it's a big worry for many South Africans that are desperate to come home at a time like this. Okay, so those are just some other stories at this moment. I think we've got our line sorted now with the Minister. Let me try and get to this interview that we've been promising you. The National Health, or the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union, or Nehawu, is approaching the Labour Court to force government to provide personal protective gear for health workers. Nehawu says the Health Minister, Employment Minister, as well as the 9 Provincial Health MECs must comply with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Court papers state that some workers are required to render services without the appropriate personal protection equipment, or PPE. The union says government has not been able to supply all the gear, thereby exposing workers to the coronavirus. Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi joins us now on the line. We weren't, unfortunately, able to get that Skype line working. Minister, thank you very much for your patience and for joining us here on Morning Live.
Thank you, and good morning, Leon. I'm also apologizing for this technical glitch.
No problem at all. I'm just glad that we're speaking to you. Now, before we look into the court bid, we understand that the Labour Department has deployed inspectors to find out if companies that are currently operating are actually adhering to providing personal protective equipment, or PPE. Yet Nehawu is blaming government for a lack of the same thing. Try and explain the situation to us here.
Leon, what I can say is that in respect of the workers who are required to work during this period, employers are required to ensure that Occupational Health and Safety Act is adhered to in respect of the occupational hygiene and the provision of personal protective equipment. We've received a number of complaints from workers that some employers are forcing them to work with out the necessary personnel or necessary personnel protective equipment. Hence, then our labor inspectors are following up, particularly at the moment in a number of the regions. And when our inspectors are going there, they are being accompanied by the police and the Department of Trade and Industry. And the reason for the latter of the Department of Trade and Industry is that there's evidence of some employers having obtained also fraudulent certificates, but also not adhering to this. And the labor inspectors have to write reports and give warnings. And if necessary, people do not heed to the warnings, they have to recommend that we close that. This applies to all the employers, whether it's public or private. The issue of the safety of the workers, it's non-negotiable.
It's certainly, and one would imagine that. But, you know, the lack of governments providing enough personal protective equipment is not unique to South Africa, and this is a global problem. It really is. Now, the COVID-19 crisis did not take us completely by surprise, and government has been saying that it's ready. Now, with regard to PPE, what's happened there? Are we actually ready?
I think, Leanne, we must accept that the issue of the demand of these PPEs and all other necessary material, the demand is too high, and the supplies are struggling internationally and even locally. But despite that, there have been a number of initiatives which have been done by DTI, converting some of the factories to produce what we need most. But it's clear that we are struggling. But what we normally say is, as much as we see this as very, very serious, and we've issued the guidelines, and we think that as the department, the personal protective equipment, we see it as very fundamental to this fight against the transmission of the COVID-19. So employers, whilst they have a duty to produce all this, or a duty to ensure that all workers are protected and are provided with this, because we subscribe to this notion of prevention better than cure. But we are saying, given the shortages which are there, we expect that the employers should sit and negotiate. And we had talked about adapting the workplaces. There needs to be some adaptation in the light of the shortages, but also the employer can be able to demonstrate on what they are doing in order to deal with the shortages. It's a catch-22 situation. Whilst we have to look after the care, but we must not expose the workers, despite we must not expose the patients further, at the same time not expose the workers. So it's a very difficult situation, but we think that the government is trying by all means to ensure that it cooperates with the private sector to produce more of the needed equipment.
Yeah, but Minister, what about looking locally and finding manufacturing companies here in South Africa that could adapt and very fastly and provide them? Because we've seen some incredible initiatives coming out by South African companies.
The Ministry of Trade and Industry and Competition, they are busy looking into that. In fact, they are already trying to ensure that some of the companies, including the smaller, the SMMEs, are deployed into this particular area to produce more, and even telling some of the companies to produce the technical material which is needed for oxygen-related initiatives. So there is a lot of attempts by government to deal with this particular matter, but like I was saying, the shortages and what is demanded, it's too high compared to what we can be able, despite the other attempts which we are doing. But we hope in a week or two we would be able to supply enough.
Which is possibly even too late, Minister? I mean, when we bring in your colleague, the Health Minister, who has been warning us for weeks now that what we're seeing is possibly the calm before the storm. You know, what will happen when the situation becomes dire and more of this equipment is needed? As you say, you know, 2 weeks and looking into things at this point shouldn't be what we're doing. Surely action is what is needed at a time like this.
Leanne, you recognize that it's not that we're waiting for 2 weeks. As we speak, currently, something is being done. The massification of this material is continuing, and that's why we're saying we're using the small pieces. We're using everybody else, and unfortunately, we have overstretched almost everybody to be able to produce these materials, and that is why I'm also saying the issue of adapting the workplaces, introducing the different shifts is going to help. It's not just going to be work or business as usual. We have to do a lot of adaptation, and we have to come with all other initiatives in order to be able to meet the demands.
Indeed, indeed. Minister, thank you for addressing that for us, and we will certainly be keeping a close eye on PPE and the demands and the need for this equipment. Let's move on to UIF now. Last week we spoke to the UIF Commissioner. Can you give us an update on the processing of these UIF forms?
We've received almost 20,000 applications, and we realized that some of them were duplications, and the actual number after it was cleaned out and refined comes to about 14,000 companies. And I want to emphasize this one earlier, that we have taken a decision that we are not going to keep our labor centers open. The decision we've not taken, lightly. And none of our issues were considered before arriving at this decision to close them throughout the duration of the lockdown. And there were a number of overriding factors that prompted us to close our offices. The health and safety of our officials, which could not be guaranteed given that there's generally a shortage of what we've been talking about, the supply of the personal protective equipment. That's we opted to encourage people to use the online platforms to lodge their claims. And also given the fact that we have a responsibility to provide transport to our people who are in essential duty, requiring all UIF officials to come to the office, would have rendered this responsibility impossible to discharge that. But the biggest thing is the need to protect the members of the public. The very real fear that given the scale of the current lockdown, labor centers would attract massive queues, effectively becoming hubs for spreading the coronavirus. And administratively, the labor center would be overwhelmed by the individual claims, leading to delays in the much needed permanence. Hence, then, the decision to work through the bargaining council, the sectoral councils, and the employers to promote online applications. So we have reached agreements with a number of the bargaining councils. We started with the textile industry. We've reached an agreement there that all companies belonging to that bargaining council are going to use that bargaining council for claiming. We are also talking to the tourism. We are talking now to the mining, and we think that today they are going to be finalizing an agreement. The auto sector, we think that today or tomorrow they will be finalizing also the agreement so that they have the MOUs with us. In the construction sector, we are doing that. We think that we have covered what we would call the employers with the huge numbers of the employees. So the intention, therefore, is that we deal with companies in an organized way. We're also speaking to the banking council to use their infrastructure to be able to facilitate the payments. It's not an easy issue. We must also have the guarantees. Hello?
Yes, Minister, we're still listening to you. You're here?
Hello?
Minister, are you able to still hear us?
there seems to be a cross line.
Oh, all right. We seem to be having a bit of a problem and difficulty hearing the minister. I'm going to try one more question to you just to see if you can hear us. There is a call for the reopening of the UIF centres in the provinces and as an essential service to speed up the processing of these claim forms. Are you actually considering reopening them, Minister?
Leanne, what we have said, if you open the labour centres, what you are likely to sit with, it's thousands of workers flocking into the labour centres, and that will compromise what we are trying to do. It will attract those massive queues, and that's undermining the whole question of talking about preventative measures. All we can do is, when we open those labour centres, it's for the people to drop their forms in the boxes which we have put there, and then we process them online. We wouldn't encourage that. The reason why we're talking to almost all the bargaining councils is meant to facilitate this.
Yeah. You know, I know that last week as well, you appealed to companies to be sensitive in managing the issue of leave. But there are reports that private companies are forcing employees to take leave. Is there a policy, or is it really up to the individual companies to decide? I mean, the law, I suppose, comes into play here.
Well, we know that in terms of the law, the company can decide that the workers should go on a leave. They can even compare. But we're saying under these circumstances, where we've also stepped up as government to say we are able to pay for this particular lockdown. We think that companies should be sensitive, should not just want to use the workers' benefits unnecessarily when there's something to replace that. We think that they must negotiate with the workers. But unfortunately, if it continues like this, we anticipate a lot of disputes, which means immediately after this, after the lockdown, there's going to be a lot of disputes between the employer and the employees. And our CCMA and even the UIF must be ready to deal with those disputes, because people are going to feel that they've been treated unfairly. We wouldn't want to come to such a situation. That's why we've been appealing to all the employers that let's try and work together and deal with this particular difficulty, this emergency, to the understanding of everybody.
Minister, I know we're running into news time, but I have to steal just a minute or two because we've been having some problems with the line. Small and distressed companies, because this is a major issue, they're arguing that they are struggling. Has the solidarity started rolling out yet?
We've always been having a facility which we call TERS, Temporarily Employees Relief Fund, which is under the ILO, where people will have to demonstrate to the CCMA that they cannot be able to cope, they have to close down, that unfortunately then the CCMA will be able to look into that and make recommendations to the fund on how they have to be helped, where we carry their salaries for a number of months whilst they are putting a turnaround situation. So all the companies have that facility, but we can't start with it now. It's something after the wave of the coronavirus, because now we have to deal with this relief of paying the relief to the workers. And after that, we will have to do a proper assessment of the companies which are not going to be able to recover, because some of the companies might take 6 months to recover, some might take more, some even a year. But even the UIF fund can help to a certain extent. Unless we just do away with and finish that fund, it doesn't become sustainable. So we still need it, even after coronavirus. So there is that facility for the companies to apply, and then they will be assessed individually.
Yeah. Minister, just finally on a closing note, already these 21 days are going to cause immense damage to companies in South Africa, and that honestly does go without say. If the lockdown is extended, will changes be made to those mechanisms that you've already put in place? Because obviously you are looking past the 21 days. What happens thereafter, and if there is an extension put in?
Our actuaries, Leanne, were crunching the numbers, looking at different scenarios. The first scenario, which is a scenario of the 1 month, which is April. And remember that we're not supposed to be paying for March. Employers are supposed to be paying for March, minus maybe 4 days. We're looking, therefore, at the 21 days, and we're talking about it that it's a month of April. And one scenario is to look at 2 months. The other one is to look at 3 months. We think that in terms of the report of our actuaries, we might be able to cover the large amount of the employees in terms of even 3 months.
All right, Minister, we leave it there for now. That was Thulas, the Minister of Employment and Labour, responding to questions regarding the Nehawu court case, accusing government of failing to provide personal protective equipment, also giving us an update on many pressing issues relating to the Department of Labour during the COVID-19 crisis. Right, the time now is 3 minutes past 8 here on the programme. Let's bring you up to speed with